Good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. You've reached the Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on KHTS, AM 1220, FM 98.1, your hometown station. Thank you guys for tuning in this morning. I appreciate it. I always do. Got a good show for you guys today. It's going to be a lot of fun. Well, I don't know how much fun it's going to be honest with you. It's got a lot of fun for me. I don't know how much fun it's going to be for you guys because it's not a whole lot of good news out there. We are going to talk about the real estate market, as we always do. We're going to spend the first segment of the show just talking about kind of where things are at and why. What's going on. We're going to talk about what is a short sale, because that's been coming up a lot lately in my office, and what is an AITD. And I'll tell you here, I'll give you a little tip. Short sales and AITDs are the sort of things that you see, the types of sales that you only see when a real estate market is headed in the wrong direction, when prices are losing, when houses are losing value. That's when you start to see these things. They're a little bit more exotic sort of ways to sell a house. And we're going to be talking about them because we're seeing more and more of them. We'll talk about the benefits and the pitfalls of both. But let's start with the housing market, as we always do, or as I like to try to. Anyway, the housing market is not in great shape. Houses are going down in value. I've been telling you guys this for the last couple of years. We lost value last year. We lost about 3 to 4% in our average housing value last year. And we're going to lose about another 5% this year. And that's just kind of where it's going to be at. Now, we had a serious shot at recovering this year, but unfortunately, some crazy things have happened globally that have seriously upset the market, and we can talk about that a little bit as we get into it too. But first, let's go to some of the headlines. So here's the first one. Housing market hits 30-year sales low as mortgage rates trap homeowners. U.S. housing is stuck in its deep, and this is Wall Street Journal, by the way. U.S. housing is stuck in its deepest freeze in 3 decades, with home sales sinking to 30-year lows even as prices stay stubbornly high. Mortgage rates well above 6% are keeping many Americans locked in to their sub 4% interest rates, freezing supply and preventing people from moving. That's the lock-in effect, which we've been talking about. At one point last year, we had about 70% of all U.S. mortgages having sub 4, sub 5 mortgage rates. And it's kind of hard to convince somebody to sell a house and move to a much higher interest rate when they've got an interest rate that's that low. Construction short. This is the real reason why we're having trouble with the housing market. There are 2 of these things, really. Construction labor shortages cost home builders $8 billion in lost production during 2025 and delayed projects by nearly 2 months on average, according to industry studies. Because it turns out a lot of houses in this country are built by illegal immigrants. Now, whether you like that or hate that, or whether that's all right or not all right, is a different conversation. But that is the way houses get built. You're not going to walk into any framing jobs and find a whole lot of people who are here legally. That is unfortunately part of the economy. And again, whether it's right or wrong is a different conversation. However, it is what it is. And when ICE goes crazy, and when the president sends them to go crazy, and they do the things they've been doing, what winds up happening is a lot of your workforce for framing and building houses doesn't show up. And when that happens, that causes housing prices to go up. Cost to build go up, cost to buy go up. Other reason, tariffs on Canadian lumber and Mexican building materials are driving construction costs even higher, while homeowners insurance has surged 70% since 2019 and even higher in California. Some people have seen their insurance rates triple in California. Because it turns out, the reason that building supplies are more expensive, the reason that Canadian lumber and Mexican building materials are so much more expensive, because it turns out if you put a tariff on those things, they become more expensive. And again, a tariff is a tax. When you tariff Canadian lumber that is coming into the United States to build houses in Southern California, that lumber becomes more expensive. The cost for that lumber does not get absorbed by the builder. The cost for that lumber gets passed on to the buyer, thus making the house more expensive. And when you can't sell the house for more money, which is what you need to do when your house, when things become more expensive, you just don't build as many houses. So that's the deal. We are in this 30-year freeze because the 30-year highest freeze we've had, the worst real estate market we've had in terms of volume in 30 years, is because the cost to build have become too high because labor to build and construction materials have gotten much, much higher because of both tariffs and because of ICE. And then when you add to that the higher interest rates, which are much higher than they otherwise would be because we decided to start bombing Iran for reasons I still do not understand, and it created a energy shock, which we'll be dealing with for at least the next year. If the war ended today, we would still be dealing with the energy shock that's resulted for the next 10 months to 12 months. So we're going to have a big problem because the Fed was getting ready to was getting ready to lower interest rates, and we were on that track. We got below, if those of you remember, we got below in January, February, we got below 6% for the first time in years. It was great. And the housing market was starting to move again. And then we started the war with Iran, caused the energy crisis, and now the interest rates back up again because the Fed cannot lower interest rates among economic uncertainty and among raising prices. And any of you who filled your car with gas in the last couple of months know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, I just filled my car with gas today. It's over $6 a gallon for the lowest grade I can find. That's insane. And that is solely because of the Iran war and the energy shock that that's caused. So Kudos to Donald Trump. He's made houses more expensive, he's made buying them more expensive, he's made building them more expensive, and he's made owning them more expensive. So thank you all the way around for that, sir. Super appreciate that. Here's another headline we could talk about. LA condo prices nosedive by 6%, which is the lowest in 12 years. This is according to the New York Post. There's great news for those seeking a place to live in Southern California, with the prices for condominiums in the area dropping to the lowest point in more than 12 years. The median home sale price in February for a condo in the 6 major counties that comprise Southern California came in at $656,000 on average, according to data obtained by the Pasadena Star News for the real estate property tracking site Atom. And if you guys are into this stuff at all, ATTOM is an excellent site for data. They do really good tracking. They take very large sample sizes. They're really good data that comes out of Atom. Anyway, the price is down by 6% compared to last year when the average condo in Southern California hit a peak of $699,000. The price plummet also shows the biggest drop for condos in the area over a 12-month span since February 2012. In other words, prices on condos, which are kind of the canary in the coal mine for housing prices, have dropped more dramatically over the last 12 months than they have since February of 2012. Now, compare that to home prices. The dream of owning a home, if you're hoping the home prices are dropping, they're dropping as well. However, according to Homes.com, and I thought this was interesting, home ownership in Southern California is 31% more than condo ownership. So if you could buy a condo for $1 million, you're going to pay $1,310,000 for that same sort of thing in a house. Houses are 31% more expensive than condos on average. And houses don't typically come with homeowners associations, but it just depends. Anyway, according to the latest report, there was a 17.7% jump in growth in the LA condo inventory, which could be a contributing factor to the price cuts. Yeah, more inventory goes up, supply and demand. Demand remains constant, and I would suggest it's actually going down because of the interest rates. But even if demand remains constant, if supply goes up, prices go down. There's more of them on the market. That's just the reality. According to Realtor.com data, the condo market appears to be entering a cooling phase across the nation. Condo prices are currently down 3.5% year over year on the 27th, and that's their 27th consecutive month of decline. Condo prices are coming down, or have come down, and they're going to keep coming down, and they will drag the housing market behind it, I promise you. I've been telling you guys this for the last, 2 years. If you have a house to sell, it better be a deal. It better be priced aggressively, and it better have something going on that the other houses don't have. Otherwise, it's not going to sell. It's just going to sit on the market while you continue to pay for it, and while you watch the housing trends go down. Prices are coming down. That's just the way it is. Another reason for that, mortgage rates have jumped to the highest level in nearly a month on war-driven inflation fears. This is for Homes.com, and this is just yesterday. Mortgage rates jumped to their highest weekly average in about a month as uncertainty in the Middle East rocked markets. According to Freddie Mac, as of Thursday, the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage averaged 6.37%, while the 15-year fixed-rate mortgage, according to Freddie Mac, is also up to an average of 5.72%. Now, according to Mortgage News Daily, which is I find a bit more accurate to market numbers than Freddie Mac, or Fannie Mae. According to Mortgage News Daily, as of Thursday afternoon, the daily 30-year fixed-rate mortgage averaged 6.4%, and the 15-year interest rate averaged 5.98%. Now, that's still lower than this time last year, so that's at least some good news. But it's still awful because we need to be under 6%. We need to get down to 5.5% before we reach any sort of normality in the real estate market. And we were headed in that direction. I don't know that we would have made 5.5% by the end of this year, but we would have been under 6% for most of this year. Probably maybe gotten 5.75% maybe by the end of the year if we were really lucky. But now all bets are off, all because of a useless war in Iran that does absolutely nothing. And again, I keep coming back to this. The Straits of Hormuz has been, I don't know a whole lot about that area. I've learned a little bit, as we all have, over the past couple of months. The Straits of Hormuz have been a trading post since the Bronze Age. So roughly since 1,000 years before Christ, it has been a trading post. And the first thing that happens, anytime there's any sort of instability, anytime there's conflict in that area, is you blockade the ports. That's what you do. So I don't know how this wasn't accounted for, because when 20% of the world's energy comes through that very narrow waterway and you have a conflict going on in that waterway, it's going to bottle up that waterway. And it's going to do so for a long time. We've been into this now for 2 months, and experts tell us that even after this, if this cleared up today, we are still 10 to 12 months before the energy shock subsides. So those of you who enjoy high gas prices, congratulations, this is your market. Those of us who loathe high gas prices and high energy prices, this is not good. Not only that, when energy goes up, and I want you to remember I said this last week too, when energy goes up, everything else follows. So what is going to happen is you're going to see inflation numbers on the nightly news that are going to be ugly. And because the inflation is going to go up, that will absolutely prevent the Fed from lowering the interest rate, and so mortgage interest rates will remain high for the rest of this year. I would be very, very happy if we got below 6% by the end of this year. I doubt it highly. I doubt it very, very highly. Anyway, ongoing volatility tied to the U.S.-Iran conflict has pushed rates up by influencing oil prices and inflation expectations. Oil has nearly doubled since we started this nonsense. The U.S. is awaiting a response from Iran on a peace proposal that could affect mortgage rates. But according to economists at Wells Fargo, while an end to the war would bring relief to the mortgage market, it would take some time for things to return to normal. And it wouldn't bring much relief to the mortgage market either, with all due respect for the economists at Wells Fargo. But at least it would stop bouncing around. This is just a mess, and it's completely self-imposed. We're finally getting over the pandemic nonsense that was caused in the economy by the pandemic and the housing slump that came with that, or coming out of that. And it was finally starting to get better. It was finally starting to heal. And so instead, we decided to start an excursion, an adventure, I don't know what he's calling it this week, in Iran. And ever since, we got a problem. Now, like most Americans, I'm not going to cry a tear about the Iranian regime, which is the leading source of state-sponsored terrorism in this world, being damaged, degraded, and destroyed. All for that. But if there is no plan for doing that, and it doesn't seem there was one other than blow this up, and you don't bring your allies along, and you don't bring the U.S. Populace along, you're going to have a very unpopular war, and it's going to have very bad side effects on the economy. And that is exactly what we're looking at. The fact that I know this and the president doesn't even know this scares the heck out of me, and I would scare the heck out of you too. I'm not qualified to be president, and I know this. Astonishing. Anyway, last article we'll talk about here. The Federal Reserve's April and quarterly annualized inflation forecast was just updated, and it isn't pretty. This is also just from yesterday. The impact on energy prices has been swift. Gas prices rose at their fastest pace in over 30 years, while diesel prices have climbed by a larger percentage than gasoline. The Iran war is undeniably pinching consumers' pocketbooks. But that is just the first wave of a historic energy supply shock. Eventually, higher transportation and production costs will force businesses to act. And that's where things can get dicey for the U.S. economy and the stock market. Before the start of the Iran war, the trailing 12-month U.S. inflation number was 2.4% and moving toward the Federal Reserve long-term inflation target of 2%. That's why interest rates were coming down. Because inflation was coming down. In March, factoring into the aforementioned energy supply disruption, U.S. inflation soared 90 basis points to 3.3%. Inflation is up nearly an entire point based on this one activity, based on this one action, this war in Iran. And it's charged our inflation up by nearly 1 full point, and that's just the beginning. We're only 2 months into this. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. The sizable uptick in inflation caused by the Iran war has effectively removed any hope of additional interest rate cuts in 2026. The Fed has moved from how much can we cut and when to do we need to raise. So the thinking at the Fed with the Board of Governors seems to be, if you read through the tea leaves of the last meeting, they're no longer discussing can we cut and when, or should we cut and when. Now what they're discussing is do we need to raise the interest rate and when. Because the Fed knows, like everybody else knows, that energy costs have gone up. And because energy costs have gone up, anything that gets built, processed, sorted, served, trucked, delivered in any way, shape, or form is going to go up. When prices go up, we call that inflation. And the only real bulwark we have against this sort of inflation is the Federal Reserve interest rate. And the Fed doesn't set the interest rate for mortgages exactly, but the mortgage interest rate very closely clocks the 10-year T-bill, and that's going up. You know, that's just the way it is. So, yeah, if you're not a fan of high interest rates, and I am not, there's only one guy, unfortunately, in this particular mess to blame. This is very bad policy out of Washington. That is what this is. This is not thought through. This was not explained to the public. This was not explained to the financial markets. And as I've said from the get-go, whether you like him or hate him, Trump is what's the word I'm like? What's the term I like to use? Chaos agent. That was it. He is a chaos agent. He spreads chaos everywhere he goes. And if you know anything about economics, and I don't know a lot, but I know a little about the housing market, I will tell you without fear of contradiction that chaos is bad for most economic markets. They're bad for markets. They're bad for stability. Markets crave stability. You know, people in the mortgage market, people who set these rates at the various banks, if they know what's going to go on next week, next month, next year, it's very easy to set the rate. If they have absolutely no flippant idea, because the White House is so incredibly unstable these days, it has to be higher. They just do. You know, the Fed spiked the interest rate to nearly 7% coming out of the pandemic. Actually, it was over 7% for a while because we were worried about inflation. Well, it was just starting to get back on track, and now we got to deal with this. It is utterly and completely ridiculous, but here we are. Once again, you can, as the expression goes, you can pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. It doesn't make it rain. And that's kind of what the White House seems to do to the American public. They just say whatever the heck they want to say. The war is over. It's complete. Great. How come my gas prices are still so high? Doesn't sound like the war is over at all. Still can't get ships out of the Strait of Hormuz. Still can't do these other things. I mean, how dare you get into a war without planning for this? But okay. And again, I'm just a guy who runs a real estate office. I have a little pokey radio show about real estate. So my focus is basically that. And I will tell you, the war in Iran, while I view it as unnecessary, and that's just my worldview, I absolutely think it's going to damage, and it is already damaging the real estate market. And all of us who own homes, or all of us who want to buy a home anytime in the near future, will be negatively affected by this. There is no silver lining in this particular cloud. It's just all cloud. So bad news. Now, the good news is at least we can mitigate some of it by knowing what's going on. So just be aware. If you have a house to sell, do it now. I told you that last year too. Do not wait. Housing prices are going to come down, and the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be. I was predicting about 3% loss on housing value in January, February of this year. I'm not telling you it's going to be 5%. And if this keeps up, it may be worse than that. So your $1 million house in January is worth $950 now, and it's going to be worth less as the year goes on. And that's just the reality of the situation. So sorry to bring you bad news, but that's just kind of where we're at. Better that you know than it's a surprise. So again, if you got something to sell, it better be a deal. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a deal because of price, but maybe yours is dealing with a view, yours is dealing with a remodel kitchen, whatever. But it better be a deal. Otherwise, it's not going to sell. So that is today's lesson, as it was yesterday's lesson as well. And unfortunately, unless Congress decides to act to make some changes, which I don't see happening, unless the White House just decides to stop behaving the way they behave, which I don't see happening, we are in for a bumpy ride the rest of this year. A very, very bumpy ride for the rest of this year. So that's that. So I tell you what, as a result of this bumpy ride, we're going to talk all about what short sales and AITDs are, which are a little bit more exotic ways to sell houses, having to do with, let's call them distressed property sales, because they certainly are. They certainly fall in that category, both. But they are a great way if you're a buyer to get a deal. So that's what we're going to be talking about, both the seller side and the buyer side of both of those things. So short sales and AITDs is what we're going to do the rest of the show. Hopefully it'll become a little bit more cheery as we go on, because there's not a whole lot of good news in the market. So I tell you what, let's go to break. Let's hear from some of the advertisers. When we get back, we will talk all about what is a short sale and what is an AITD. So thank you guys for listening. I'm your host, Rich Szerman. You're listening to KHTS, AM 1220, FM 98.1, your hometown station. Hey everybody, thank you for listening through the break. You've reached your hometown station, FM 98.1, AM 1220. You're listening to The Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Szerman. And we're talking about where the current housing market is. Before the break, it's not a whole lot of good news. Housing prices are starting to come down, and they're not tumbling. I keep saying this. It's not going to be 2008, 9, and 10 all over again, something crazy like that. But the housing prices are coming down. We are going to lose 5% between January and December of this year. I guarantee you that. It'll be worse in some areas, it'll be better in some areas, but on average, Southern California, Santa Clarita Valley, we're going to lose 5% on our housing values across the course of this year, just like we lost roughly 4% last year. 3 to 5, so last year, depending where you're at. So, and that is largely the result of energy disruption. That is the result of inflation caused by tariffs, by ICE raids, and by, most importantly now, the energy disruption because of the Iran war. Silly stuff. Anyway, so as a result of all this, because housing prices are coming down, we are seeing more and more what are called short sales and what are called AITDs. And so we're going to talk about both of those things and kind of what they are, the differences between them, and if you're a buyer, how you can benefit from them, and if you're a seller, how you can benefit from them. So let's talk about short sales first, because they're the most prevalent. A short sale is a sale of a home for less than the amount owed on the mortgage, requiring the lender's approval to avoid the foreclosure. In other words, if your house is worth $1 million and you owe $1.1 million on the property, you're not going to be able to pay off that mortgage. If you sell the house for market value, which is $1 million in our example, you're going to be $100,000 short. I'm ignoring all the costs of sale and everything else just to make it simple. So if you owe $1.1 million, you sell it for $1 million, you're going to be $100,000 short. So in order to make that deal happen, rather than letting the house just go to foreclosure, you got to approach the lender and you say, hey, lender, my house is only worth $1 million. It's not worth the $1.1 million I owe you. So I'd like to sell my house for what it's worth. You go your way, I go mine. And California is a non-deficiency state, so it means it's very difficult for people to get deficiency judgments, lenders to get deficiency judgments. Not impossible, but difficult for them to get deficiency judgments on mortgages, and expensive to do so they don't usually. So a short sale is a very good option for the lender. Most lenders will entertain short sale offers. In other words, they will take less than they are owed just to get the property moving to avoid the foreclosure. See, people, you understand what your interest is in avoiding a foreclosure. You lose your house and damage your credit and all that other good stuff. But people don't understand, banks don't want foreclosures either if they can avoid them. It costs banks money, time, energy, etc. They would rather avoid a foreclosure if they can. Now, the trick with a short sale is to explain it to a bank in such a way that they understand that it is in their interest as well. Most agents that I know who do short sales, who fail doing short sales, make that one giant mistake. They don't understand the bank doesn't care about what's good for the consumer, unfortunately. They'll say they do, but they don't. And they certainly don't care what's good for the realtors. They care about what's good for them. So you have to couch it in that. Like, in other words, to use my example, hey bank, this house is worth $1 million. We can sell it for $1 million, and we realize we owe you 1.1 million, so you guys are going to lose $100,000. But here's the thing: this house that is worth $1 million is a short sale on the open market. If it goes to foreclosure, you're going to sell it for about 20% less. So you're going to sell that house for $800,000. So now that $100,000 loss we're asking you to take just became a $300,000 loss, not to mention the time, the energy, and the cost of the foreclosure as well. So that's going to cost you another $20,000 or $30,000 by the time we're done, probably, and opportunity costs as well. So instead of losing $100,000, you'll wind up losing about $330,000. So maybe you want to consider the short sale. Just the dollars and cents of it, I think, might be a good idea. And that's kind of how you have to approach a bank about it. And that's the realtor's job to do that, not the consumer's, of course. But that's how you make short sales happen. So going back to this really good article from Zillow.com, if you can no longer afford your mortgage payment and owe more than your home is worth, your lender may allow you to make a short sale transaction, what we just described. A short sale means selling your home for less than you still owe on your mortgage. You'll need the lender's approval to do a short sale because they're accepting less than is owed at closing. The trick is convincing that's in their interest as well. The term short sale does not mean the process is quick. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. Actually, it refers to the short sale process falling short of what you owe on your mortgage. Short sales are a common way for homeowners to avoid foreclosure, to protect their credit from further damage, and regain financial stability. That's the other thing. With a short sale versus a foreclosure, you are much better off as a seller with a short sale because it's going to do a lot less damage to your credit than a foreclosure will. The idea basically is this: if your house went to foreclosure, the credit markets view you as being irresponsible. Whether that's accurate or not is a whole other argument. I don't think it is, but that's kind of the view. If you have a foreclosure, you did not do the responsible thing. You didn't handle your bills. We don't want to loan you more money, right? That's going to be the credit market's response. However, if you do a short sale instead of a foreclosure, okay, you got yourself into some trouble. At least you did the responsible thing and you did a short sale. In other words, financial markets view a short sale as the responsible way to behave in a bad situation, whereas a foreclosure is viewed as the irresponsible way to behave. To get more direct about that, after a short sale, you can go get into the mortgage loan a year to 3 years after a short sale. After a foreclosure, it's going to take you 2 to 7. So you got a much, much better shot at getting decent financing, get your financial house back in order after a short sale than you do after a foreclosure. Anyway, if you're a buyer, a short sale can enable you to buy a property at a discount. Although buying a property in a short sale may require patience, and oh boy does it, as a short sale can take longer than a traditional house sale, short sales are often the best deals on the market. And that is completely true. The best deals out there tend not to be foreclosures, they tend to be short sales. Now, I put out the call to my database here. People ask what they had questions about with a short sale, and I got a lot of questions. So let's start knocking some of those down. So first is short sale versus a foreclosure. Why would you do a short sale instead of a foreclosure? If you're a seller, I just explained it. A short sale does less damage to your credit. You control the process rather than letting the bank control the process. So at least you have some control of your own fate, which I think is a very good thing. And most importantly, it helps you dig out of the hole a whole lot quicker. You know that old adage, the first thing you do when you're in a hole? Stop digging. A short sale is stopping digging. A foreclosure is continuing to dig the hole a little bit deeper. So how about, okay, here's another one. How do short sales work? Well, the short sale process typically takes 3 to 6 months from start to finish, so it takes a while. Though timelines may vary from as little as 10 days, which I have had happen, to over a year. I had one recently which took a year and a half. For complex situations with multiple lien holders and other components. Yes, sometimes you'll have more than one lien holder on a short sale. I've got one right now where there are 4. And one of which is the state government's franchise tax board. So we have to weed through all of those lien holders. We have to determine what they can and can't get out of it as a foreclosure, what they can and cannot get out of it if it's a short sale, and then sell them essentially on the idea of doing a short sale. And then when I say sell them, I just dollars and cents. Do a short sale because you are better off as a short sale bank than you are than doing a foreclosure. Numbers we just went over with my $1 million example. So you're far better off that way. How does a short sale work? Well, there's a lot of stuff that goes into a short sale. First, you got to get your ducks in a row. You got to hire an agent. You got to make your case to the bank. You got to figure out what market value is. There's a lot to it. But what I suspect you're asking is what's different than a regular sale. What's different is you have to get the permission of the people who are not going to be made whole. The lenders involved, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many entities are involved that have liens on the property that are not going to be made whole, and you have to get deals with every one of them, and they all have to agree to the deals with each other. So that's a bit of a landmine field to be walking through, minefield to be walking through, but we do it on a regular basis. I've done short sales for 30 years. I helped pioneer the use of short sales in Southern California, so I know a lot about them. And I'm pretty good at it. I serve as a resource for all sorts of realtors and people all over the country when they're talking short sales. So if you have any questions about a short sale, feel free to give me a call. I give out my phone number on the air all the time, 661-714-1400. Again, 661-714-1400. 888-888-1400. That's my personal cell phone. You can call me at that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If I don't answer, please send me a text, and I will call you back as soon as I can. And I'll be happy to answer your short sale questions. Matter of fact, this morning a guy in Michigan called me about short sale, and I was answering some of his questions. And there are different rules in Michigan than California, of course, but the federal stuff is all the same. And the bank he's dealing with I know very well is Carrington. I know them well. I have a short sale going on with them right now. So I hope I was able to answer his questions. Anyway, next question. Does a short sale ruin your credit? A short sale can drop your credit score by anywhere from 75 to 200 points. Your lender will report the short sale to the credit bureaus either as settled or paid satisfied. Either way, it's better than a foreclosure. A settled debt without a late mortgage payments during the short sale process could drop you as little as 50 points, although who's going to do it a short sale and not have late payments? It's kind of part of the deal. If you incur late payments during the short sale process, your score could drop as much as 200 points. In my experience, it's about a 150-point drop on average, because most people go about a year without making payments before they get to the short sale component. Short sale will remain on your credit report for 7 years, but as we talked about, you can usually finance new home purchase within 1 to 3 years of a short sale. Almost double that with a foreclosure. Okay, let's see. What does a short sale mean for a buyer? For a buyer, a short sale means it's going to take a lot more time and you're going to get a lot better deal. But you're going to have to wait. I've got one right now. It's been going on for 9 months, and we still don't have a resolution because it's changed banks and a few other things. So for a buyer, it means infinite patience. But it also means you're going to get a much, much better deal. Short sales tend to sell for about 10 to 15% under market value. 10 to 15%. Again, if we're talking about $1 million house as a short sale, the house that's worth $1 million, to use that as a meter, if you're 10 to 15% under that, you're $900,000, $850,000. I don't know about you, but if I could buy $1 million house for $850,000, I'll wait. I'll be patient. If it's the house I want, if it's the one I want to live in, I'll wait. So they tend to be the best deals out there, but you have to have infinite patience as the buyer. It's just part of the deal. Next question. Why do short sales take so long? Some of the stuff we were just talking about. Why do short sales take so long? Often because paperwork isn't complete by the seller, or multiple loans on the house. You have to talk through 4 or 5 different loans sometimes in different entities, different requirements. Sometimes the lender is just too busy to get back to you. They take forever. Carrington's an example of that. We've had one with Carrington now for months. We're still waiting for them to respond. I got an email 2 weeks ago saying they'll definitely respond in the next 3 to 5 business days. That was 2 weeks ago. Still hasn't responded. As a matter of fact, they haven't even responded to my email saying, how come you haven't responded? This is just the nature of it. And the good news is, a seller is from a short sale, though, while you're doing a short sale, as long as the bank is considering loss mitigation efforts, and a short sale is one of those, they are prohibited from foreclosing. So you can use a short sale as a seller to stay in the house that much longer. I mean, usually when you're in distress and you're losing a house, you're playing for either time or money, sometimes both. So in a short sale, you're playing for time, because short sale takes 6 months or a year. That's you staying in the house, not making a mortgage payment for another 6 months to a year. So keep that in mind if you're a seller. Of course, if you're a buyer, that also means the seller's going to want to take their time because they're living there for free while you're the buyer waiting for all this stuff to happen. So there are positive and negatives on each side, and each situation is different. And the other big problem why they take so long is not only do you have to get the approval from the mortgage lender, the mortgage servicer, you also need to get the investor to sign off on it. And we've had many times where the servicer or the lender said, it's fine, it's totally good, let's go. And the investor who said it's fine takes weeks to get back to us to sign off. Or they decide they change their mind. That's happened to us too. What are the pros of a short sale? Next question. What are the pros of a short sale? Well, for the seller, you avoid foreclosure, and they can take a good long time, so you can stay in the house while that's going on. So that's a pretty good thing. It will reduce or eliminate the debt on the property. In California, we're a non-deficiency state, so it'll eliminate the debt entirely. You can't get deficiencies. If the short sale lender in other states is getting less than they're owed, they may ask you to sign what's called a deficiency judgment, which says you're going to make up that other money privately. In my $1 million example where the bank was losing $100,000, if you're in a state like Texas or Louisiana, the bank would likely ask you to sign a note for $100,000 because they still expect you to pay them at some point. In California, we don't have that problem. Short sale sells for $1 million and the bank loses $100,000. That's just that. There's a tax consequence because the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board look at debt relief as taxable income. So that $100,000 that you didn't pay in mortgage, you would be taxed on. But in California, we're pretty liberal about waiving those things. So the idea of the Franchise Tax Board and the IRS as well is they don't necessarily want you paying. It's debt relief as taxable income is a well-founded theory, but debt relief for short sales they'll usually let you waive in most cases, in my experience. So what are some of the other pros for a short sale? Again, they're the best deals out there for a buyer. You'll qualify as a seller for a mortgage sooner because there's a lot less damage to your credit. You protect your privacy more than anything else because foreclosures are public, short sales are not. And most importantly, you control the process. If you're a seller and you do a short sale instead of a foreclosure, you are now in control, at least some of it. Whereas with a foreclosure, you're 100% out of control. You're going to do what the bank tells you to do, and the bank has complete control. Whereas if you're in a short sale, at least you have a modicum of control. At least you have some control over your own fate. And I've done short sales for myself as well. I will tell you from personal experience, you are better off having at least one hand on the wheel. You just are. So what are the downsides of a short sale? Well, it impacts your credit as a seller. nearly as bad as a foreclosure, but it does impact your credit. Lenders got to approve everything, as we talked about. It's time consuming, and timelines are often uncertain. You have possible tax consequences, we just covered. And most importantly, as a seller, no proceeds from the sale. If a bank, using my example, is losing $100,000, you don't get to make money on it. Now, there is one exception to that. We get away with this in California. You don't get to do this in other states most of the time. You can get what's called relocation funds. Sometimes, as part of a short sale, a bank will allow you to get relocation funds as part of the deal. So as the seller, not only does it take more time to keep you in the house longer without making a payment if you're in foreclosure, but you may actually get relocation out of it. Can't promise you that because every deal is different, but you may very well. Last question we'll answer here about short sales. Should a buyer buy a foreclosure instead of a short sale? No. Foreclosures can also be bargains, but with a foreclosure, you're taking on a heck of a lot more risk. Most of the time with a foreclosure, you're buying it sight unseen, but even if you are seeing it, you often do it without the benefit of inspections or without title searches. You skip a lot of stuff when you do a foreclosure. You're far safer with a short sale as a buyer than you are with a foreclosure. Also, you can't really get financing on most foreclosures. You have to pay cash for them. With a short sale, you can get financing just like any other house deal. So buying a house without disclosure or inspection, which is a foreclosure in most cases, is incredibly dangerous. I think short sales are a far, far better deal. They are far safer for the consumer, and they're better for the seller. So I think they're better for the buyer and the seller. So that's what a short sale is. So what else can we talk about? I think that's pretty much it for short sales. So I tell you what, why don't we go to break? We're a little early to break here. When we come back, it's going to be all AITDs. AITD stands for All-Inclusive Trust Deed. We'll talk a little bit about why these more exotic type of sale instruments, these sale styles are showing up, both short sale and AITD, when we get back from the break. So please listen through the break, and when we get back, we'll talk about AITDs. I know it's riveting. We'll talk soon. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. You're listening to The Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on KHTS, your hometown station, AM 1220, FM 98.1. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're into the third segment of the show now. So those of you guys who listened to the first two segments, I appreciate that. We talked all about the real estate market and kind of what the disaster that we're dealing with interest rates and prices coming down and interest rates going up and all the rest of the craziness. And because that is the case, because prices are coming down, we're starting to see more and more short sales and AITDs. So that's today's show, is short sales and AITDs. A short sale is when you're going to sell the house for less than you owe on the property. We talked a little about why it's good for sellers, why it's good for buyers, why it's even good for the bank. So short sales are much, much better than a foreclosure. That's for sure. They are better for the seller's credit. They are better for the buyer's pocketbook, because a buyer's going to get a better deal on a short sale than with a foreclosure, and a buyer's going to have a lot less risk with a short sale than a foreclosure. Banks lose less money with a short sale than a foreclosure. So there are all kinds of reasons everybody participates in a foreclosure. Everybody benefits. Short sale. Everybody benefits from a short sale because everybody participates in a short sale. The bank gets a better deal, the seller gets a better deal, and the buyer gets a better deal. It works for everybody. You just got to know how to prep them and how to get them to go. So, and I do a lot of that. So if you have any questions about short sales, I'll say it again. Feel free to give me a call. We just did a quick overview. We're going to do the same thing with the ITDs. You have any specific questions to your situation, or you have any specific questions just in general, please feel free to give me a call. I can be reached at 661-714-1400. That number again is 661-714-1400. Yes, that is my personal cell phone. Yes, I do answer it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If I'm in the shower or asleep or on the phone, or on air, just do me a favor and send me a text, and I will call you back as soon as I possibly can. Again, 661-714-1400. If you have any questions about any of the stuff we talked about today, specifically short sales or AITDs. So let's get into AITD. So, unlike a short sale, and this is the biggest difference, an AITD stands for All-Inclusive Trust Deed. Now, these were rampant in the 80s and 90s. Now we're seeing them again. What happens with an AITD, the market conditions have to align themselves for AITDs to become reasonable for any of the parties, and you'll see why in a second. An all-inclusive trust deed, otherwise referred to as a wraparound mortgage, is used by homeowners when purchasing a property that is still under the existing mortgage without paying off that mortgage. Let me say that again. Purchasing a property without paying off the underlying mortgage. In other words, owner A has a mortgage on their house. Buyer B comes in and wants to buy that house, but wants seller A's mortgage because it's a low interest rate. You can't really assume the mortgage because the bank won't allow it. So you can do what's called a wraparound mortgage, which is where you essentially take over the mortgage. Let me get into this a little more. The All-Inclusive Trust Deed, AITD, and note is a debt instrument and security device for the carryback sale of mortgaged real estate. It provides agents, sellers, and buyers with the flexibility needed to finance the balance of a sales price remaining to be paid after a down payment is made. Let me give you an example. This will make a lot more sense. And this is one from my files right now. This is a true story. If a homeowner is facing an imminent foreclosure sale and there's a defaulted first mortgage against the property for $700,000 at 2% interest, and the seller is seeking a sales price of $900,000 but can't attract a buyer in sufficient time to avoid a foreclosure, the seller might offer to allow a buyer to take over or wrap the first mortgage. Now, this first mortgage, as we said, is at 2%. Market rate right now, as you just discussed, is about 6.4%. So 2% is going to be pretty attractive on a mortgage payment, especially at $700,000. Just to give you a comparison, 2% mortgage at $700,000 with impounds, with taxes and insurance, about $3,000 a month, a little less, about $2,900 and change. That same exact amount, everything else being equal except the mortgage rate being 6.4 as it is today, you're looking not at under $3,000 a month, you're looking at about $5,000, $6,000 a month. So literally double the mortgage payment. So if you want to save, you want to live in this house and you want to pay half the mortgage payment, you might want to consider an AITD. So the first mortgage, whichever the sales price, the buyer would pay if the seller in this case needs to sell for $900,000 and there's a mortgage of $700,000 and they can't attract a buyer, they offer up the wrap, they offer up the AITD at 2%. Into the sales price of the $900,000. In other words, the buyer would pay the difference to the seller of $200,000. You have a $700,000 loan at 2%, which you want to preserve, and they're buying it for $900,000. That means there's a $200,000 gap. I'm ignoring cost of sale and everything else just to make this easy. So that means the buyer would have to come up with that $200,000. And there are a couple of ways to do that. The simplest is if the buyer has $200,000. Put up the $200,000. That money goes to the seller. The seller gets their money out of it. The buyer then takes over as an AITD. So the loan would stay, and this is key, the loan would stay in the seller's name. The buyer would be making the payments, but it would stay in the seller's name. Now, we'll go into the pitfalls of that because there are several. We'll talk about those before we're done here as well. But if you have a house like this where you have $700,000 at 2%, which if someone else buys it, they're going to get a mortgage at 6.4%, give or take these days. And no one's going to pay $900,000 for that house with that kind of an interest rate because the payment's too high. But if you can offer that same person a payment that is half of what they would otherwise be paying, maybe they come up with a $200,000. They borrow the $200,000. They'd have a first for $700 and a second for $200. They can do it that way. If they have the cash, they can do it that way. If the seller's in a position to carry the paper, maybe the seller carries a $200,000 debt lien on the property, still services the first lien on the property, and the buyer still gets a great deal. If that does that kind of make sense to you guys? I kind of hope so. So you wind up with, in other words, you leave the loan that's there alone. The buyer takes over that loan. They don't assume the loan because that loan will remain in the seller's name. The buyer is just going to be servicing that loan. However, the title to the property, the ownership of the property, does go to the new buyer, right? So buyer gets the house. It's in their name. It's their house. It's going to be in their name on the title, but the loan on the property will remain in the seller's name. Now, there may be another loan after that. That's in the buyer's name, depends on how you structure it, but that's the basic idea of an AITD. You are taking over the loan by other means because the bank won't allow you to assume it because if it's a 2% interest rate, they're not going to let anybody assume that kind of a loan. So let's talk about what the pitfalls are because I put this out for questions as well, and pretty much all the questions I got were, what are the pitfalls? Sounds great, but if we do this, what's the downside? And there is downside for both. Most important, there's a credit risk without direct control. In other words, you, seller, are relying on the buyer to make the payment on the house. What if they don't? Now, you can address each of these. There's a way to address this. What I would suggest doing is having the buyer go at 2 months ahead as part of the purchase of the property, so they're always perpetually 2 months ahead on the mortgage. That way, if they fall 1 month behind, you as the seller, whose name is still on that mortgage, have at least 6 with it. So that's one way of dealing with that. But there is a risk because the person who's responsible for paying the debt is not the seller anymore, even though the seller is the one who's on the loan. So the seller remains liable to the original loan, but has no direct control over whether the buyer makes the payments. If the buyer defaults, the seller's credit is still at risk, even if they don't directly collect the payments. Now, in situations like this, the seller is usually facing a foreclosure anyway, so this is still better than that. Buyer default risk. Like any seller finance loan, AITDs expose the seller to the risk that the buyer will fail to make the payments. Foreclosure on a seller finance loan is often a lengthy and costly process, and the buyer may have little incentive to comply. If the buyer's losing the house, they're not going to comply. They're just going to sit there until they get thrown out. So there is a danger there to the seller. What's the danger to the buyer? Biggest, due on sale clause. Every loan that I've ever seen, every mortgage loan that I've ever seen in California has on it something called a due on sale clause. What that says is, if the lender did full repayment of the property is sold without the loan being paid off, they have the right to call the loan due and payable, accelerate the loan, they can trigger foreclosure, or they can demand total payoff. What typically happens with the due on sale clause, if it ever were to occur, I'm told is a bank would call the loan due and payable, give you 90 days to pay off the loan, usually through a refi or something else, or they'll foreclose on the house. That's usually the protocol a bank's going to follow if they choose to follow one. But I'm here to tell you, I have never seen a bank exercise a due on sale clause. It doesn't mean they won't, and it doesn't mean they can't. It just means I've never seen that. So it is something to be concerned about, especially in California. But concern is good. You don't need to concern yourself about doing a deal like that. If it's a good enough deal, it might be worth taking the risk. I mean, if I were looking at $700,000 at 2% versus $700,000 at 6.4%, I might be willing to take that risk. I think most people would. My mortgage payment would be half of what it otherwise would be. So I think the due on sale exposure, while important and while it's a big deal and something you got to pay attention to, I think it's a manageable concern. A lot of AITDs also rely on refinancing. What if the buyer can't refinance? AITDs often assume a buyer will refinance within a set time frame. That's how most of them are set up. If the buyer can't qualify, the seller remains tied to the original mortgage longer, which can affect their ability to secure future financing and limit flexibility. So that can also be a massive problem. And the third and most important, well, it's really not just the buyer to both sides. This is really the biggest problem overall. It's complexity. And AITD combines primary and secondary mortgages, not always secondary mortgage, but usually, into one trust deed, making the lien hierarchy more complex. The seller's second mortgage is subordinate to the primary lender acts, like in a foreclosure. The second mortgage can be wiped out. That's primarily if you're talking about an AITD where the seller is carrying some paper as well. So the seller is the second. But in any case, the second comes after the first. That's where they're labeled first, second, etc. And that can be an issue. So AITDs are dangerous. I'll be the first person to tell you that. So you've got to, like anything, any deal, even a standard deal, you have to be very careful. You have to make sure you know what the terms are. The seller needs to know what the terms are. You need clear communication between the parties so that everybody knows exactly what they're doing. And AITDs can be made to work. They absolutely can. The bottom line with an AITD is they can be useful in certain situations, but they introduce layered risk, credit exposure, due on sale clause threats, refinancing dependency, and complex liens. Buyers and sellers should carefully review the terms, understand the legal implications, and consider whether the benefits outweigh the potential for dispute or loss of property. In many cases, legal experts recommend caution and avoidance unless the terms are fully understood and protected. We should avoid any contract you don't understand or anything that's not done completely. Most of this came from Homes.com, by the way. Great article in Homes.com. Anyway, credit recording. So that's what's in the market right now. We're seeing a lot more short sales where the seller's going to sell the property as kind of a normal sale. They go their way, you go yours, but for less than is owed, and the lender has to sign off on that. And in AITD, you're just taking advantage of a really good interest rate. And because we had so many dynamic, like at 2%, et cetera, so many sub-4 interest rates out there, you might find somebody who's willing to let you take over that interest rate as part of the sale. So that might be a good way to go. So if you have any questions about AITDs or short sales or any other things like this, I'm here to fix your problems. I do it for free. I do it all day, every day. Feel free to give me a call at 661-714-1400. My number again is 661-714-1400. You've been listening to The Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Szerman on KHTS, AM 1220, FM 98.1, your hometown station. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys have a good week and be good humans.